I hit live.
I know. Everybody, this is my fault. I'm the one who delayed it. Jeff said 1, and I said 1 p.m. And then
Would it be a 10-minute drill if you weren't pushing the limits of time?
A, no. B, that this is the 10-minute drill to do it, isn't it, Jeff? Because what a game. What a game. You know, the irony here is, Jeff, this is debatably the most important football game that the Chicago Bears have played this season. The irony in that being that we are not looking for them to win, and the Bears are definitely putting their best foot forward in that regard. I mean, a sudden late Kyler Gordon illness. It's not to say that, Jeff, you know what the complicated part about this is? Conspiracy theorists, Bears pillars like myself, find it really easy to be like, Gordon gets an illness the day before a game we have to lose. Come on. But at the same time, it is very possible that all of these injuries are 100% legit. I mean, Jeff, if anything, our own Mason West it's
Bare bones.
Bare bones. Thank you. I was like, to bear and back again. Like it has that subtitle in it.
He had like 7 different options when he was starting, and then they wound up on this one. So
Bare Bones has done a great job of illustrating just how often NFL players, what's the way you'd put it, Jeff, that they hide injuries from the public, that the stuff that doesn't make it onto the injury report is often grisly stuff that would sideline you or me from months. 5 weeks of running. Right. And they play through it on a week-to-week basis. And so it's very possible that Justin Fields, who looked gimpy in the middle of that long run, strained his hip. Why wouldn't it be? You know, also an awfully convenient time for it to suddenly not be healthy enough to play. Does that make sense? Like, I'm sure there's a little of both here.
Makes sense to me. I think that the reality is, if you're not playing for anything, what's the point? And so it's not just because, like, hey, we really want to get a chance at this top pick, or at least make sure that we have the second pick or whatever. I think it's like, look, you're a veteran, you know, it's the end of the long season. We're not going anywhere. You're important to the future of this franchise. It doesn't really matter if we win this game or not. We're going to sit you. And so that's a lot of teams around the league when you get to that point. Now, if the Bears were in contention, Justin Fields would be playing this game.
Sure.
You know, like a lot of guys would be playing, you know, you wouldn't shelve guys at the end of the year like that if you were competing for something real. So I don't know how conspiracy it is. I think it's more standard operating procedure.
I think where things get complicated, Jeff, is the bounds that you set. So I'm sure you remember Dan Wiederer got lit up the other day on Twitter because he basically said the road for the Bears to play meaningful December football is a long one. And I think you were with me making the case. Meaningful December football is a really low bar, right? You said that in a meaningless game, the Bears would probably sit Justin Fields. They have played 5 of them now. I mean, from the moment that the Bears were mathematically eliminated weeks ago, a lot of these games were in the technical definition meaningless, right? And they didn't, and that's okay. I mean, the argument that they were going to play Justin Fields for development's sake is a good one. I mean, football's a violent game, and it's not as if, Jeff, as much as I know Bears fans wanted to make the argument, like in July, it was we should sit Fields the entire season. In October, it was we should sit Fields starting in November. In November, it was we should sit Fields starting with this Packers game throughout the rest of the year. I mean, Jeff, it's not as if all the quarterbacks within the bottom quartile of offensive lines just don't play. Like, there is points where we can take these things and we can make a molehill an awfully large mountain, right? But
the difference is that he's hurt now, right? Like, the difference is that you have enough of an injury to like justify it. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it looks a little weird, right?
Probably have 4 or 5, to be honest. Like, just taking a guess. I mean, Jeff, watching it back again, look, I don't want to belabor a point that's already been discussed, but watching the game. So as you know, I watch the game and then I go through with a fine-tooth comb, and then I watch the game on the All-22. And then through showing people the All-22, I watched the game a third time with a fine-tooth comb again, right? The forced fumble that Justin Fields allowed when he got hit straight in the face, the more I watch that, Jeff, the more from then on, Justin Fields' decision-making gets awfully hazy. And look, far from me to beg the question. I'm no medical doctor, but we've seen a lot of the crazy, weird stuff going on in Miami this season, haven't we? People
Sure.
get cleared from concussion protocol, which Justin Fields, by the way, was checked for immediately in that moment all the time. And apparently these symptoms don't show up till later. Look, I don't know. It just starts to look visually like Fields may have gotten concussed. That you could call it bell rung if you want to use an old guard term that you probably heard when you were playing, Jeff. Like, which isn't to call you old. It's more that,
Experience.
coaches always had a term for
Mhm.
not a concussion, but concussion like symptoms. Because if they used the big C word, they had to take the kid out of the game. You know what I mean?
Well, and honestly, Robert, you'd hear it more in you'd hear it phrased as, he just got his bell rung.
Exactly.
You'll be all right.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Like, it's maybe that's a minor concussion, but look, that's not to like derail the train. I mean, to be honest with you, Jeff, and I hate saying this, but like as a football fan, if the Bears were 9-8 and Justin Fields got hit in the face and the NFL had to make a decision on do we put one of the NFL's most electric superstar quarterbacks, at least to watch, back in the game, or do the Bears just lose and now they're out of the playoffs? I have a feeling we know which way they're going to skew, like regardless of what they say about player safety. But that's all just like logistical discussion about how to handle a violent sport when it's violent sport gets violent, you know?
All right. So let's talk about this a little bit. So this is our spot. You and me have done now. This is show 17. This is our little preview show. We started off with the preview show by doing where we would record together. We would
Yes.
have like takes and we would stop and,
Yep.
then you would cut it together and you'd splice back and forth between me and you. And like, we kind of proved the concept. It was nice.
It was
And
good.
then football happened and we had committed to a lot. And so we decided that we would do a more live format that is a little easier on us. We had the visuals. Those were nice. We did that for about half the year. That worked out well. We'd love to hear what you prefer, if it's worth the extra hours that Rob has to spend to make that happen. If that's something that makes more sense for us going forward, we'll look into that. The visuals have been fun to just share. I don't know who's playing in this game. I'm not going to do a visual today. Like that's my part of it. I don't know who's playing. I don't know who to star. Like, I can give a star to David Montgomery and
Got to give it to Nathan Peterman.
Braxton Jones. Like, who's my second star? I mean, and it just started to get really frustrating. I don't know who's
star best player or most impact.
Well, it was the best players.
Yes.
Right. And then it's like, I don't know. And then, on defense, we kept running through them. I don't know who's playing for the Vikings. Okay, so we're not going to do that. And then our friends at Prize Picks have been very nice to us all year. We've been making Bears picks, Bears and the opponent picks for prop bets on this show. And then we've been doing league wide on the gambling show on Sunday mornings. They're not in this game. Like, there's a defensive, there's like sacks bets for the defense, and then there's kicker bets. I'm not going to do a whole segment on kicker bets and defense bets, but I just real quick, let's talk about just Prize Picks real quick. Prop bets. You can get more information tomorrow on the gambling show. Ross has been killing it all year. I've been doing pretty well. If you're betting with us all year, you're up like 28 units. When I say units, it's like, what do you bet, right?
Yep.
So if you bet $10 every week, you'd be up $280 betting with us. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good return for one segment, right? We can't say that on any other segment. Like, that's clearly it's our best. We're not picking lines as well as that, but like, we've been really good at the props. We talk about it a lot on this show. It's been fun. It's a good thing to do. It's something different. I think that we see the game in a way that I think maybe gives us a little bit of advantage, and that's why we do pretty well on those, just because we dig in pretty deep, and you can kind of tell with scheme and stuff like that where maybe the carries are going to go or the receptions are going to go. So anyway, if you want to bet with us, there's 1 week left, and then you get into the postseason. Promo code Bears, deposit match and all that kind of fun stuff. What did you learn? This is your first foray into any kind
Into
of
betting?
sports betting. So what did you learn from your experience doing that?
So first things first, I learned that parlays are hard. That you
Mhm.
think, slam dunk, 4-leg parlay, all these are gonna hit, and you do get 3 of them. And the moment that fourth one, like, I mean, it can be as simple, can't it, Jeff? As like, I remember there was a point where we bet that Jared Goff wouldn't eclipse 280 yards in the Lions game. Right? We said under. Um, and it wasn't because Jared Goff played poorly. It was because the Lions as a whole were so dominant that Jared Goff did not have time to throw for 280 yards before they shut the passing game down. Now, if you, on the other hand, had been for a like Jared Goff and the Lions are going to smoke these Bears, of course I'm taking the over, you lose. And weird little gambling situations like that, or like garbage time, like a Hail Mary counts as like the Hail Mary gets completed, and so it counts as 50 yards that there shouldn't have been. It's wild seeing how some of these late game, like meaningless scenarios completely shift the gambling outcome. And it's one thing to note that 2 years ago, but it's another thing when it affects money, so to speak, where Stephon Diggs is out of the game. Oh, to use an example, I have a fantasy championship that we're trying to decide, Jeff, whether I won it or not,
Mm.
because Stephon Diggs's game was cut really short with the DeMar Hamlin stuff. And from a just ethics perspective, we're like, what do we do with that? Because
Here's what I would. So I did that game didn't impact anything fantasy wise for me personally. So like I don't have like a answer that I have applied in my league or anything. But I was thinking about that as someone who ran a fantasy league or multiple fantasy leagues for many years. I think my answer would be that if you had a Bill or a Bengal in your lineup, that you should get their season average, and just leave it at that, because it was the last game of the week. You didn't have any time to react to it, all that kind of stuff. And depending on if that helps you or hurts you, like you may not like that, but I think that's really the only like fair thing there is. If you had T. Higgins or Jamar
yeah,
Chase or Joe Burrow or Josh Allen, I think you just give them the average points for the year, and you just call it that. You don't get a big spike, but you don't get a zero, and you see where the chips fall.
yep. I mean, I think that's more than fair. In this case, he needed like 20 points. I think we defaulted. Anyways, we're getting off of prop bets. We could talk about my fantasy story later. It's more that I think it's funny how often a prop bet can have next to nothing to do with what actually happens in the game. To use another example, we have been killing it betting over on Justin Fields sack totals almost every week. I mean, I need to go back through and tally how often has that prop hit, but it's a lot. Like, you've talked before about how if you can average like a 58 to 60% win percentage, you're slaying. And I mean, I'm pretty sure Justin Fields has hit on probably 78 at minimum of those props, just because the guy takes a lot of sacks.
Right.
And he certainly took a lot of sacks this year. And so it's funny how you can find a little prop that becomes very emotional, right? Where the only reason the prop number is at what it is, and that like Vegas, so to speak, doesn't want to move the line, is because a ton of people come in and they say, I love Justin Fields. He's not going to take sacks against this crappy Lions defense. I'm going to bet the under. And you could just profiteer on the over pretty much all season. Now, of course, it does feel like, while I've always heard the sentence like life's too short to bet the under, or yeah, life's too short to bet the under. I don't feel like that applies to props quite as well. I mean, you tell me, Jeff, in your experience, it doesn't feel like the under hits as often in props as it does in over unders on game totals.
I mean, I would assume that it's fairly 50-50, but I don't know. I don't have any mega data on that or anything. But uh my sense is that I always find what I'm looking for when I'm looking at a suite of bets to pick the five is, in general, I'm looking for bets that jump out at me, but a lot of times I'm finding bets that I like to hit over, if that makes sense. So I'm
It
always
does.
kind of promoting these bets that I like that are overs. But once in a while, I'll find one that I like that's an under. Like I had a bet a couple weeks ago. It was probably one of my favorite props that I found. It was Christian McCaffrey carries. It was under, and I put under 22. The number was just too high for a number of carries. And I know that he had just had like a 25 carry game, but
25 is a ton of carries in the modern
It's a
NFL.
ton of carries, and it doesn't make any sense for them to
And
use
that's not
him that
touches
much.
either.
It's not
Because
touches, it was
24
carries.
touches with
Yeah,
like
yeah,
8
maybe
checkdowns, not
right.
unusual.
But the carries, I was like, oh, that doesn't feel right. And I think he finished well under that, right? And so there's a little bit of like sometimes you just find bets you like and it just sticks out, and sometimes you think maybe you just kind of found something that was maybe a mistake in the algorithm that generated it,
Right.
and you hop on those. But in general, when I'm looking for bets, I'm finding the ones I like that I think that'll hit over. So
Yeah. By the way, Jeff, I hate to put you on the spot, but we've got 3 comments about David Montgomery. So I'm going to highlight Lorenzo Mara's question about it. Is Montgomery a Bear next year? We obviously know that there's that Instagram post that's been posted where he said last ride number 32. And so you tell me, Jeff, in your opinion, both reading the tea leaves and what you would do, is David Montgomery a Bear next year?
I'll say that I'm going to give the very squishy answer first, and that is that if the Bears bring back David Montgomery, I won't be mad. Like I'm not an analytic guy that's going to say running backs are so easily replaceable that you don't want to bring back running backs. You don't want to give them a second contract. The idea that when people say don't overpay, these guys get money. So like, let's not like paying a running back at like the second tier, which is what I think that he would be in line for, is fine. Like that's fine. You're not going to give him Christian McCaffrey money or anything like that. That's not going to happen. No one's going to give Dave Montgomery that kind of money. He doesn't have that kind of production. But if he gets solid veteran money for a running back, that's fine. So I'm okay with it. If that's what happens. I don't think we have enough evidence to accurately know, like for sure, what Ryan Poles is going to do, because we don't know how he's going to treat these kinds of decisions. But the fact that he doesn't have he didn't extend him already. You never heard anything about. He's never said anything publicly like, hey, yeah, we'd really like to bring. Nothing. I don't have anything on him. So you'd think that he might want to hand the reins off to Khalil Herbert, and he might want to draft his guy. And I don't think that's the craziest thing in the world. I will say this: David Montgomery is a good football player. He's not as efficient with his carries, but he's a pretty well-rounded back. And I don't think he's going to be as expensive as people want to throw around.
No.
And so I think I mean, if it were me, I'd try to bring him back. How about that?
Well, Jeff, let me go ahead let me go ahead and give the harsh answer, right?
Sure.
So, and to be fair, everybody. All right, so let me start with a question, okay? Who in this chat misses Roquan Smith and thinks that Ryan Poles did him so wrong, and that the fact that they did not bring him back at whatever price he wanted is unconscionable? Jeff, do you feel that way?
My opinion. I was pretty happy that they made the move.
I was too.
Roquan.
I am of the opinion that one of the hardest things for football fans, myself included, to remember is that you will learn to love again. Envisioning the Bears without David Montgomery sticks them with only Khalil Herbert, right, Jeff? That's unconscionable. I mean, how on earth are you going to trust Khalil Herbert, who can barely pass protect, if pass protect at all? And he certainly can't catch the ball, right? Like, how are you going to trust him with the whole running back load? Well, maybe there's a chance that the Bears are going to bring somebody else in, free agency or the draft. I mean, look at Roquan, replaced by Jack Sanborn, and now the whole city of Chicago is in love with 57, right? Like, you will learn to love again. If the Bears do let Montgomery go and they bring in, I don't know, say Tony Pollard or somebody like that, somebody who's extraordinarily explosive, crazy with the ball in his hands, there is a chance that come a little bit of time passing, you will say, I wish David Montgomery well where he is. I'm happy with who we have. And now, that's not to say, Jeff, that David Montgomery hasn't earned it as a Bear. David Montgomery has been an awesome Chicago Bear. It's very similar to the conversation that we had about Jordan Howard when Jordan Howard was leaving, right? He has done nothing wrong to this city, and I hope he gets paid. He's an excellent third down running back for the Chicago Bears. I think he's way better in the passing game than people realize. I just think, kind of like John DeLatalia said in our chat, that the Bears are looking for a running back. Like, they released a scouting video, Jeff, where they talked about what they're looking for in running backs. They talked about like explosiveness. They talked about top speed. They talked about a whole bunch of things that weren't David Montgomery's game, which you got to remember, David Montgomery was drafted to run inside zone, to run the Chiefs offense that the Bears then couldn't block for. That's not the Shanahan style offense that needs dual threat pass catching and rushing running backs and that can hit the edge and make it hurt. I mean, look, Jeff, I think the harshest truth in the NFL, this applies to David Montgomery this year. Next year, it very well may apply to Cole Kmet, which is like a fair warning, right? And that's that at the end of your contract, David Montgomery bears just as much relevance to the Chicago Bears' future as Dalton Schultz. As Tony Pollard, as Josh Jacobs, as other free agent running backs, right, Jeff? Where when Cole Kmet hits the end of his contract, Cole Kmet at $10 million is the same price as Dalton Schultz at $10 million. So it becomes a question of, does the player just magically get better because we extended him, right? Like, does us extending him get the Bears a team discount? Depends on the player, right? So you set a number. You say, well, you know what? If David Montgomery is going to come back at 3 years, $6 million, then I think I'm fine with it. What if his agent says, are you kidding me? It's going to be $10 million at least. Then fan expectations change. I think we'd all agree with that. That it's easy it's always easy to look at a player you like and visualize them coming back in a contract that you also like. But I don't think that's always how this sort of thing works. And especially with the Bears going through phase 2 of a continued roster purge, it just won't surprise me if the Bears look for a running back that can carry a little bit more weight in terms of not his burden, because David Montgomery is that bell cow back that will carry a ton carry the ball a ton of times, take a ton of hits. But look at the difference in yards per carry with Herbert this season and David Montgomery. And I think you can see the gap in production that if the Bears are really going to keep handing the ball off on 2nd and 10 almost every single time they're in that position, they probably want a running back that can get them 5 to 7 yards against that light box. Look, Jeff, I think this exact kind of offseason is the most brutal kind of offseason where even the players you liked suddenly start to show that they may not even be in the future plans, that the roster is going to continue to churn. It's easy to look at this roster and say, okay, but at least we know who the core pieces of the future are. I don't know if we do, Jeff. I mean, as much as I think it'd be ridiculous, all the way down to making sure that Ryan Poles evaluates the quarterbacks that are going to be at the top of the draft, because I wouldn't replace Justin Fields, but that doesn't mean Ryan Poles won't. So when it comes to David Montgomery, I can't help but think that the question becomes, if David Montgomery was in the free agent pool, would you want him more than you would want other people? Because that's what the situation looks like right now, isn't it? Like, he is an unrestricted free agent. He is just as much a signable running back as Josh Jacobs, as Tony Pollard, as Raheem Mostert, as all the other running backs that are in free agency. And you have to compare him thusly. You don't compare him based on this Bears roster. You don't compare him saying, wow, what is the, like, what about, or like, how important was he? How could we have done in 2021 without David Montgomery? It's not a loyalty test, unfortunately. It's the NFL. He is another running back in the free agency pool, and it just won't surprise me if the Bears pivot in another direction purely because of what he can and can't do.
Yeah. Again, I think he's a good football player. They bring him back. I'm not upset if they decide that it makes more sense for him to walk in free agency. And I if anything, though, next year there just needs to be a reestablishment of the carries. Khalil Herbert needs more carries than David Montgomery. Maybe not necessarily more touches, more carries. I need more Herbert in my life.
I'll tell you, Jeff,
what I'm saying.
You too. Okay, so I thought the same thing. I'm not about to dispute it until I actually bothered to watch some San Francisco All-22, because I was sitting out here on stream thinking, there are tons of people. I already saw this with Zappy. I know we're going to see it with Purdy, that are going to look and they're going to say a 7th round pick is outpassing Justin Fields, and you're still defending Justin Fields. What are you thinking? Right? So I took a look at the tape, and the tape is a lot of bad footwork. It's a lot of missed reads. This isn't me dunking on Purdy. I like Purdy just as like he's a fun story. You and I've talked about it all the time from a content creation perspective. 7th round pick, stepping in, winning 4 games in a row to go to the playoffs. This rules. Great storytelling, right? It's so many dump offs to Christian McCaffrey, and Christian McCaffrey is so good that that decision's just never wrong, right? There's never a point where Brock dumps it off to Christian McCaffrey and Christian doesn't make that decision worth it. And it won't surprise me if the Bears look, I don't think they're going to like draft Bijan Robinson. I don't think they're going to be looking for Jahmyr Gibbs. But like, I do think that this is the offense where the Bears may actually spend a penny or two at running back, because Herbert is not a pass threat. He's not even a great pass protector. So he's a great first or second down spell runner, right? But he's not your gotta have it back. And that's okay. So it won't surprise me if the Bears actually look for a weapon at running back that isn't necessarily just an afterthought. Hey, maybe they go the cheap way. They get like a Raheem Mostert that can do damage in the screen game as well as the running game for relatively cheap. Maybe. Or they look for a more well-rounded back. I mean, I'm not trying to start the Saquon Barkley to Chicago train. I think that's a dangerous train to be on. But of all the teams in the NFL, Jeff, this is a system that would really love it if it has a running back that can get that to use. I know, Jeff, you've talked about a certain book that I won't reveal that you've continued to want to write in the past. This is the kind of system where if you have a running back that can make that extra jump cut that springs that extra 6 yards, that the offense benefits from it. And if you take a look at the compatriot team that we can compare this to, Green Bay, you tell me, Jeff, Aaron Jones, AJ Dillon, have the Packers underinvested at running back? Yes or no?
No,
not at all. So why would it surprise us if Chicago does the same, given how important that position is to this offense?
Right. Makes sense. Hey, you mentioned draft prospects.
I
want to talk about our offseason project?
Do you want me to talk about it, or do you want to talk about it? Because you're the GM.
Well, I'll introduce it, but I want you to fill in.
Sure.
Since you're going to be front and center here. So this is us pivoting off of this season, which was, thank you for coming along for the ride. It was long and painful at the end, and we all appreciate that. But we've been trying to keep as focused as we can on the season before we shift our focus completely to the off season. But Robert and I have been talking about this for a while. We had a pretty good sense that this was going to be a pretty important off season. And one of the things that we've always wanted to do was to go through a mock off season through the lens of building the draft board. So we are going to have a recurring series called Build the Board. And it is going to feature our friends at WCG that like to do draft stuff, plus another friend of ours in our circle. And we are going to scout players. We're going to bring on people to talk about the cap. We're going to bring on people to talk about free agency moves and all that kind of stuff and how that affects the board. And then we're going to end, of course, with, I would assume, doing some pretty intense live streaming during the draft.
Oh, yeah.
And using our board to talk about how that's going to go. So there's going to be player features. We're going to have, specific player breakdowns. We're going to have, I have a little vision of like little fights between players that are similarly ranked. So we have one guy presents, player A, another guy presents player B, and we, have like kind of an argument to determine the winner of who's going to be higher on the board. Each position group is going to be ranked. I don't think we're going to rank long snappers or anything like that, but the major position groups we will have ranked. And then at the end, towards the end, as we get close to draft, we'll take all of those individual position group rankings and we will build the big board with all of that together. So we will certainly be talking about, top 100 players type volume, probably more than that. We're not going to rank every single player. This isn't going to be an exhaustive thing. There's going to be players that through the evaluation process aren't going to necessarily make sense in the eyes of the scouts that are a fit for the Bears. So we are going to absolutely be going through all of the eligible players to the extent practicable, and then we are going to start to pull those players aside that we think, yes, these guys are going to make our board. Now, are we going to get everyone right? Of course not. Like,
No.
there's going to be somebody that Bears are going to take that, through our scouting process, we start to determine, well, we don't really see that. That's fine. But we're going to try to do this in a manageable way, and we're going to try to replicate what we believe front offices do to the best of our abilities as we go through this. We don't have as many scouts as a professional football team or anything like that, but we've got a number of guys that are interested in this work. We're going to put up articles on Windy City Gridiron. We're going to have videos as much as possible on Second City Gridiron YouTube, and we're going to be tweeting out a lot of stuff throughout this process. Robert's going to be one of the main scouts. We're also going to be working with Jacob Infante, who all of you guys know quite well. Then we're also going to be working with Brandon Robinson, Danny Meehan, who you guys probably know from different WCG appearances, and then Quentin Cristo, who's a friend of the channel. And we're going to have a pretty major presence at the Senior Bowl. And who knows about the Shrine Bowl? Maybe there's going to be a little bit of presence there as well. And we are going to just bring as much draft content in a new and different way. This is an experiment. We're really excited about it. There's going to be some stuff that are going to be rough edges. We hope to sand those down and make them work. But we're really excited about the concept, and we're going to bring more accessible language and a more accessible information about the draft, and try to demystify some of these terms and some of this stuff that you hear about and you don't really understand what that means. We're going to try to bring that home to a bigger audience so that more people can be interested and invested in the draft. So that's the big idea. That's the project.
Want me to take it from there, Jeff?
Yeah, please.
So look, we're trying to find a balance. So first of all, I'll answer a couple questions. ML Fields, I'm glad you think it sounds great. So do we. Is it going to be a weekly show? Yes. We're still pinning down exactly what day it is, but you should expect at minimum weekly content. But this should be, the idea is to make it as micro as player-specific reports and as macro as the full room coming together to talk about the way that the board is evolving. Marshawn, you mentioned, will we be live during the draft to mock a pick at real time? Yes. Another major asset of this is that come draft season, we're not just looking at Jacob's big board, which is great. It's a very good big board. Jacob does a great job with it every year, but also the board that we built, just getting a sense for how the Bears like to think about things. The goal is to find a midpoint between throw out everything you know about draft content, the standard, like, what do you call it? Disruptor, like startup speech, Jeff, and also changing the formula a little bit. Draft content is done for quote unquote for everybody, so much so that it disregards the fact that to one team a 4-3 or a 3-4 outside linebacker that's really good in pass coverage is completely irrelevant to a team that is a 4-3 team looking for a defensive end that can stop the run capably, even when occasionally dealing with a tackle tight end double team. We want to be as specific as we can without being confusing, because another thing that Jeff and I have identified within draft content talk is there's a lot of jargon that goes around. People talk about stiff hips, but what does that mean, right? To use a silly example that I like to think that Bears fans are fairly, at least you've seen it before. When Cole Kmet makes a hard 90-degree cut, it takes him a couple of extra steps and a little bit more time to get through that cut than Trey Burton did. Now, the trade-off is that when Trey Burton is at the point of attack trying to make a block, and of course, we're talking about when Trey Burton was good, not the awful fallout of 2019, but at that time, when Trey Burton goes to make a block at the point of attack on a pin and pull run, which is the one where the tight end pins the end of the line of scrimmage, and the tackle, you've seen Braxton Jones do this all the time, swivels around to take out a DB, you wouldn't be able to trust that Jimmy Graham or Trey Burton could make that block, whereas Cole Kmet, who's bigger and stronger, might be able to. It's not that the stiff hips are an active trade-off. It's just the difference is in these players. So when I tell Jeff about Darnell Washington, the 6'7", 270-pound behemoth tight end out of Georgia that is an absolute blocking maniac and plays like he enjoys hurting people. That gives Jeff a picture in his mind of what he's looking for, even though it's not going to surprise you, Jeff, that he's not the most fluid receiver in the world, but when he's running down a seam route, a safety's not going to get in his way. It's not that simple. It never is. But we're going to try to find a balance between approachability so that we can bring in as many people as possible, a Bears focus, but also making sure that the information that we're presenting is as accurate as possible. In some cases, I hate to call anybody out. So if you do this kind of work, like, know that we're not calling you out. But there are a lot of people right now, Jeff, that have Jalen Hyatt and Zay Flowers mocked in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th round. And those two receivers are just not going to go that low. Like, they're going to test in the 4.4s when they run a 40, and then they are going to suddenly be second rounders. Their tape hasn't changed, right? Maybe access to their tape has changed a little bit, but public perception will swing when these guys go out and dominate in the postseason stuff that they're going to do. We've seen it every year. Jeff, it's not about forgiveness, but I will never let go of the fact that Tyler Smith always looked like a first rounder, and he was in the 4th come draft season. Devontae Wyatt always looked like a first rounder. He was mocked in the late 3rd. And Christian Watson was everybody's favorite 5th round pick in a mock draft. And he's dominating on the Packers, where they traded up to get him. And he always was going to be. Does this make sense? I know this makes sense, but our goal is to have those conversations early, where instead of going through mock draft simulators now, where everybody can just make a killing, like they can just have these incredible drafts where everybody picks the same roughly 15 players because you can just get some steals in the later rounds. We want to build a board where we have those conversations about Zay Flowers is up here. He's up here because he's going to do this in the combine. And if he doesn't do this in the combine, we'll bring him down appropriately. But I expect Quentin Johnson to push 4.3. And if he breaks 4.3, he's going in the top 10. Like that, those kinds of conversations where we want to be real with you. We want to be team focused with you. But if you follow us and you also follow the Cowboys, for instance, you should get a very good understanding of who these players are, because while we're not building the Cowboys board, we're going to be talking relatively specifically about these players instead of trying to wrap everything into the same roughly 10 terms. You know what I'm saying, Jeff?
I sure do. We've got a good comment here about stiff hips, opposite of Shakira. So
Yes.
I guess stiff hips mean lying hips, because Shakira's hips don't lie.
Let's see. I'm sure Shakira could probably run some pretty nasty routes, to be honest.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, she'd be a good route runner. Absolutely.
Those hips would lie. She's got that ability, but it's also going to be interesting because, Jeff, if there's one thing that's going to be tough, you are going to have the job. If we haven't talked about this, this is the moment that we're talking about this. You have the job of trying to figure out Poles' focus, which is going to be the toughest one, right? It certainly seems as if Poles has a focus on athleticism, on projection, on trying to use data in some ways to attack the best players in the NFL. But it's tough because we don't have a decent idea of what their scouts are, since they were using Pace's scouts, as is tradition, to handle last year's draft. So in terms of tiebreakers, in terms of prioritization, we can take a guess as to what we would prioritize, but it's going to end up to you to see if you can pretend to be Ryan Poles better than anybody. So good luck, because that actually sounds quite difficult. But
yeah, and I'll say, there's a lot of discussion right now on Twitter about, well, if the Bears have the number 1 pick, like there's a non-zero chance that they're going to take a quarterback and, all this kind of stuff. There's no indication that I can see that the Bears are interested in dealing Justin Fields and taking a quarterback. However, we will talk about the quarterbacks. Sure. It's important for us to talk about the quarterbacks because you have to know what value your pick has. And you have to know what your competition might be interested in. So if the Bears do have the number 1 overall pick, then it behooves them to understand that quarterback class up and down to know what other teams might be willing to trade up to get that player. Is this quarterback class like last year's quarterback class, where there was only 1 first rounder, Kenny Pickett, And that was a little bit like question. We weren't sure Kenny Pickett was going to get drafted. He was what, 20th, 19th, something like that, right? I mean, it wasn't very high. And so, you know, where where does this class rank, right? Is it like the Justin Fields year where, you know, the Trevor Lawrence and, you know, Zach Wilson, which obviously doesn't look very good right now. You know, are there a lot of guys, right? So you have to understand the class, and it's also just, you have to know quarterbacks every single year anyway. You never know what's going to happen. And then, of course, we'll talk a little later too. Is there a younger guy that the Bears should be targeting with a later round pick that they can draft and develop behind Justin Fields to be a competent backup who can come in and run, you know, 75% of the offense, right? That's something that needs to happen too. So, you know, we will talk about quarterbacks, but we will talk about it in a non-clickbaity, very like realistic way for how a general manager and scouts should be thinking about the quarterback class and how you should think about every quarterback class. Because if you find yourself in a position where someone needs to come up for your pick and it's for a quarterback, you can take advantage of that.
If along the way you end up with an idea of how we can walk this balance between promoting the product accurately, but also making the most accurate product possible, let us know. Because I know I tend to skew towards, I don't care if one person views it. If it's good, it's good. And Jeff, I feel like you find yourself there sometimes as well.
You got to be,
But
you got
it's not a
to be
bad
happy
thing.
with the product that you create, right? You got to be proud of it. And that's what, you know, that's what we both try to do, is create good stuff, but we want to make it accessible, and we want to make it interesting. And I think it's gonna be great. Jacob's great. Everybody knows Jacob, but it'll be great to get him a little bit more on camera and talking about these players that he spends a lot of time with in terms of being in the film room. I don't know anybody that watches more film than Jacob at this point. He's going down to like Division III tape. He had tape on long snappers. Like, I mean, this guy's kind of insane, right? So, you know, he's going to be in a lot of these shows because we're going to lean on him. You have a full-time job, so, you know, you're not going to be doing D3 tape from Delaware to try to uncover a
Not
long
D3
snapper,
from Delaware.
right? Like, not going to happen. But you're going to watch a ton of tape, you know, and so you're going to be in on this a lot. And then we have, you know, like we said, 3 other guys that are watching a lot of tape already. The spreadsheet's already filling up with players, and it'll just be a way for us to go through each position
Oh, yeah, I
group.
need to update that sheet. That's on me.
So yeah, and we also want to green light that sheet. We would like to have share read access with a spreadsheet so that you can see our board as we build it, and follow along with us. And so we want to make this interactive as much as possible. I saw somebody say something about a poll. I don't know about a poll of like picking the pick. Lester usually does something like that anyway, so that'll be on the site. But we'll probably do something along the way, more like, you know, who do you want us to spotlight? You know, who would you like a little bit more information on? You know,
Yes.
we'll do some viewer interaction in that way.
One thing I will mention, Jeff, just before the thought escapes me, you mentioned quarterback. Okay.
Mhm.
So look, as your resident Bears pillar here, it's worth remembering that if the Bears, whether number 2 or number 1, which, Jeff, I would hate to end this without giving a small preview of Colts Texans, just given that it's debatably more important than like Minnesota Chicago is. But so anyways, if the Bears do end up with either number 1 or number 2, you're not going to be able to trade out of the pick unless you create demand at that spot. And one of the easiest ways to create demand at that spot is threaten that you're going to pick a quarterback anyways. As much as you may think that that's ridiculous, that the teams will threaten each other, remember, it's not so long ago, Jeff, that the Detroit Lions were more or less boxed into taking Jeff Okudah, even with Tua Tagovailoa and Justin Herbert 5 and 6 right after number 4. Now, it's not to say that Jeff Okudah is not a perfectly good player. It's more to say that to all the people saying, well, we'll get number 1 and then we'll trade with the Texans. It did not work for Detroit. And it didn't work for Detroit trading with Los Angeles afterwards. Both of them just waited because Detroit had Matthew Stafford. And where was he going to go? Right. So this conversation you're hearing right now, as as bizarre as it sounds that suddenly Brad Biggs and Dan Wiederer and all these beat reporters are taking a story that maybe they have and maybe they haven't had leaked to them, that the organization is dissatisfied with Justin Fields, and Ryan Poles coming out and saying everything's on the table. It is the burden of the first overall pick or the second overall pick to always look at your quarterback options, no matter how entrenched your situation is. It's just rarefied air to have a pick that high. And if the Bears do want to trade down, they have to create demand. And yes, that means team bidding against each other. But one of the other hot ways to do it is to make it seem just like the Browns did, if you remembered, Jeff, back in the day when Ryan Pace drafted Mitch Trubisky, the Browns had it leaked for an awfully long time that they wanted a quarterback and that Myles Garrett might fall to Chicago. This is not an uncommon tactic, and it's a tactic that you're going to continue to see throughout this offseason. More than anything, I think, Jeff, I'm just trying to say that, like, strap in. You're going to hear a lot of people saying a lot of things about the Bears potentially looking at a new quarterback, and it's just part of the business of football. If the Bears weren't doing it, I actually think that would be more worth criticism than coming out publicly and backing the guy, because he doesn't need public backing to know that he's got the job. But other teams read the news. As much as I know they say they don't, Jeff, you and I both know other teams read the news. And if they suddenly start thinking, if you catch John Schneider saying, maybe they're going to take a quarterback, or Chris Ballard is another great option where he says, gee, maybe I need to go up there so that I can take my quarterback and we can reset our franchise. That's how you may or may not get an extra second round pick in the deal, just to make something happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking back to the Trubisky year and how irritated I was that Pace traded up one spot, and with multiple quarterbacks. I mean, I understand that Watson turned into a milkshake duck or whatever that term is, but good football player, and then of course you have Mahomes, but I was so frustrated with that because I was like, you have three guys on the board. Like, just who cares? Who cares if San Francisco is going to take somebody? You've got three guys on the board. You're saying that you value this player so much more than those other two, that you're willing to give up all this additional capital and move up one spot. That's insane. That was just a dumb thing. And now I'm going to be like, boy, I really hope somebody makes a decision like that.
Yes.
And so, in a way, if it's number one, you kind of are hoping that the evaluations come back and say, this guy, this number one quarterback is number one quarterback level, kind of a no doubter. He's, you want to hear, maybe not generational, because I hate that term, but you want to hear one of those, like, hey, this is one of those guys that, like, it's safe and high ceiling and all that kind of stuff. And if you start hearing that and you don't hear it from like the next two guys, there's basically three guys that everybody talk about. That can have a little bit of striation between the top tier. And then that might make that number one pick a little bit more valuable. And so even if the Bears have it and they have no intention of it, there still would be interest and demand to try to get that guy, that dude. And then after that, I don't know. Right. So if the Bears are at number two and they can't trade down, because that's how it shakes out, and people are just like, well, they're not going to take a quarterback, we're fine, we'll sit here, then we'll talk about that scenario. We'll talk about, well, do you take Will Anderson or you take Jalen Carter, right? Like, I mean, it's possible that they might get, like you said, get boxed in and have to take a player. And oh darn, they're going to take a really important player for the defense
changing player
Bears fans are going to love, right?
I mean, look at Chris Jones right now, Jeff, or Aaron Donald in his time. Though I think Chris is a better example because there's not a Jalen Ramsey on the Chiefs defense. Dude is a one-man defense. Like, yes, they have plenty of other good players, but in terms of star power, he's the motor, and he's a good motor, like, of the entire Chiefs defense. It's not to say Jalen Carter is going to be that guy. There's some projection involved, but it's practically as if, to use an example, we're talking about, do you want Khalil Mack? That could be Will Anderson. Or do you want Quinnen Williams? And that could be Jalen Carter. Like, both of those players, Jeff, like, both of those are franchise defensive linemen.
Right.
I mean, no matter what your situation is, like you're saying, if the Bears get boxed in one way or another, it could be worse.
There are some blue chip players at positions of need, like,
now,
and high value positions too.
Now,
like those guys just aren't out there.
And Jeff, we'll talk more about what building the board is, but we're actually going to start that. I don't want to say soon, but relatively soon. So there's an aspect of let's leave that aside and get there when we get there. J2K, you asked about 2 specific players. There'll be great ones for the Shrine team to cover. Right now, I'm in the throes of pretty much watching as
Senior
close to
Bowl,
every
Senior
single
Bowl.
senior bowler as I can, which is an awful lot of senior bowlers for a part-timer. So I'm chewing through them and haven't gotten to Shrine guys yet. We've divided everybody up into position groups. So last I checked, I think I'm doing safeties and tight ends and maybe doing a couple others. So our defensive line team can, I don't want to say get back to you. That makes it sound way too corporate, Jeff. But
We'll definitely talk about them though. Yeah,
one of the other things that we do have to talk about though is, frankly, I think one of the most interesting and enthralling games that I've ever seen, like, on a television. Now, let me explain why. First of all, renewable and rechargeable. Carter does look like the definition of a loaf. The question is, okay, so Jeff, I hate to say this or to derail because I'm not trying to go there, but there are some of these players that distinguish themselves so early that they can't come out till they're able to come out. And I've always wondered, what is the mindset of a player like Jackson Smith-Jigba or Jalen Carter that knows they're going to be drafted top 5, is trying not to get hurt, and is basically just trying to preserve their body? I'll tell you, Renewable, I can't say for sure one way or another that you do or don't know how that stuff's going to carry into the NFL. I just think we live in an ever-changing world where right now older rookies are starting to become more common because, as we're seeing with plenty of guys going back just over the last couple of days, NIL is a powerful keeper tool for a lot of these universities. And if you can make $400,000 having one more fun year in college, that's a little more incentive to not leave than we've seen in the last couple of years. But I digress. Colts Houston gets real interesting, Jeff, not because it's a standard football game, but because I think there's a chance this is a football game both organizations will attempt to lose. So it's different competition. I mean, think about it, Jeff. We're looking at an upside down Colts team that understands just how upside down they are. And for as much as Bears fans would make a huge meal out of how different number 1 and number 2 is, if I was a Colts fan, I'd be saying nothing gained by dropping down to 6. A lot more is gained by going up to 4 and giving yourself a chance at 3. Not to mention, you make your division that little bit worse by taking number 1 away from a direct division rival. Jeff, this would be like sticking the Packers with number 2 just because you could, and you benefit in the draft position game at the same time. Like, I find it so intriguing that the Colts' motivations to lose this game are debatably as strong, if not stronger, than the Texans' motivations to lose this game, who have just won one recently. And Lovie Smith has nominally said that they're going to try their doggone hardest. You tell me, how do you think it is reasonable to think that the Colts, again, we don't want to use the word throw, but they are starting Sam Ehlinger, like a 5th round rookie for starters, who I don't believe eclipsed 13 points in his last couple starts before he was summarily given the hook. I feel like it is legitimately reasonable to think that Houston might actually lose this game.
Here's another thing. Like, fans are smart enough, I think, to know how important these things are. The Texans are on the road. So in a way, it almost kind of makes it easier for the Texans to win this game.
Tell me how that's easier.
Right? Like, because like their fans are going to be like, they want the number 1 pick. And so I don't know if, like, you're a fan of the team, do you still go and you cheer for them to beat the Colts? If they were hosting the Colts, would their fans come in and like be cheering them on to win or lose?
Oh, I see what you're saying. I mean?
So
you're saying you're saying the Texans may get like emotionally revved up because when they score, Colts Stadium's going to go crazy.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Like, the Colts fans might be cheering for the Texans. So and so there may be like more momentum for I don't know.
I don't either.
I kind of want to watch the game.
I don't think it's on there,
but like I kind of want to watch the game, and I kind of think that Lovie Smith basically signed a 1-year coaching contract.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they it's for more years, but they can like just fire him. And he has to know that they set him up to fail, and that's fine. Like sometimes you take those bargains and you see what you can do with it. Levy wants to win, and I'm sure Jeff Saturday wants to win too, but who knows? Maybe Jim
Well,
Irsay
that's the
instead.
other thing, Jeff. Jeff Saturday was hired because he's so tight with Irsay
Right.
that they just had a conversation and he got the job. So I'm just saying, Jim Irsay is likely not stupid either, right? And
he's probably fueled by substances, but
and willing to hand the Texans their number one overall pick and first choice at a quarterback are different things.
of all of your conspiracy theories, Robert, I love knocking the Texans out of the number one spot and then immediately calling the Bears and saying, what do you need for us to jump up and top the Texans? Because then you've doubly taken something away from the Texans, and you've made it cheaper for you to move from 5 or 6 up.
And again, 1. Jeff, to use terms that help Bears fans sympathize with what's going on. This is the Bears having just a couple more wins than the Lions playing the Lions. Where the Lions are sitting in the number one overall pick. The Lions, in this case, obviously don't have a quarterback, have basically thrown the year. But do you want Bryce Young in your division? Your scouts have been doing the same work that their guys have, right, Jeff? Like both of your teams have probably been looking at quarterbacks, especially since the middle of the season. So if you love Bryce Young, if you think CJ Stroud is Justin Fields but better, if you think that Will Levis is like the guy, why would you give the Texans the chance to take that away from you? You know they're not going to trade with you, but Chicago might. And it's just, to me, there's a gamesmanship to this where you can't make the players try to lose. That's a great way for their career to end. It will not work, right? But the Texans, debatably, Jeff, are already starting a roster the Colts are starting a roster worse than the Texans, just out of the box. I mean, with Kenny Moore on IR, with the quarterback that they're playing, with the shambly state of their roster, you could make a very strong case that the Colts are already worse than the Texans, just out of the box. And if the organization is motivated to drive a specific result that would help their team more than winning would, it just makes for bizarro football. And I'm salivating at the opportunity to watch that game because I've never seen one, right, Jeff? Like tonight, we'll get the chance to watch classic win and you're in football. Nothing more fun than watching a young quarterback trying to meet his destiny at an intersection point, like what we'll get to do with Trevor Lawrence and the Jaguars tonight, right? But with the Texans and Colts, it's inverted football. It's organization versus organization, almost at the expense of the players and coaches on their roster. And it is, I can't wait to see what happens. I
think it's amazing that we could have a situation where, like you said, Sam Ehlinger and Nathan Peterman could determine a huge portion of the Bears' future. And people are going to nitpick, hey, number one versus number two is not a big deal, whatever. It is. There's a significant difference in capital. It would be big. Could the Bears get boxed into having to take somebody at number one? Okay, yeah, sure. Anything can happen, but I think that there's real possibility here that pick is going to be incredibly valuable because I think we haven't got there yet, but I think that there's probably that striation that I'm talking about between the number one quarterback and the number two, number three guys.
Well, and the other thing that's worth remembering is, so everybody wants to talk about how, next year we get Caleb Williams, right? Next year we do get Caleb Williams. The 2024 class, it's got Quinn Ewers, it's got Caleb Williams, it's got some solid players in it. Well, Jeff, this year we get quarterbacks. Last year, we did not have any quarterbacks, as evidenced by the fact that the entire top 10 passed on quarterbacks. And Jeff,
some of those teams definitely punted out of that quarterback class that needed a quarterback. And some of them that took quarterbacks, I mean, do the Titans feel like they got them?
They drafted a third-round quarterback. From a pure investment perspective, I love Malik Willis. I think that he had a much better chance of developing into an A-grade starter, but I'm one of those crazy people that thinks that B-grade starters are harder to win with than meet the eye. I digress. The point is that when you look at this class, I mean, Jeff, let's just be blunt about it. NFL coaching contracts are not that long. right? NFL GM contracts are not that long. If you punt a year because you got a chance at a quarter, or you don't think any of these quarterbacks are good, but you like the quarterbacks that are coming out next year, you can't do that again, especially since
Yeah.
you know for a fact that nobody Jeff, that gets number one is trading out of it to give anybody else Caleb Williams. So 1 out of 32 teams will get Caleb Williams. Everybody else gets these guys. And you know what? CJ Stroud had his best game of the season against Georgia at the end of the year. That's good for Chicago. Like, stock up, end on a great note. Looked like another, I don't want to say another Justin Fields. That's not fair. But it looked like CJ Stroud had been watching Justin Fields highlights and suddenly realized I can do some of that too, and showed the world. Will Levis has been rocketing up draft boards. Bryce Young has been QB1 for the better part of a year. Like, it's not to say that these guys are going to get pursued like the 2020 quarterbacks were. It is to say, Jeff, that there are a lot of guys whose jobs are on the line that get a nice 2-year mini extension the moment they draft a rookie, because who expects a rookie quarterback to win? Like,
Sure.
it's
Absolutely.
job security. Pace was so good at job security, taught me so much about how a lot of these guys will operate if it means they can keep their jobs. And I don't know who that's going to look for, but hey, Chris Ballard may very well get a chance to be the GM of the Colts for another 2 years if he adds Bryce Young to a roster that he's told Jim Irsay is stacked. And then if they don't win, which they likely won't, he says, come on, we're talking about a rookie quarterback. You got to give him another year. And then, sweats and adds people on the side. But you get what I mean, Jeff? Like, there could be artificial demand purely because there wasn't any demand for last year's quarterbacks that creates a feeding frenzy of people trying to not end up like Ron Rivera. Because, I mean, how fun did that look?
Right. Yeah. It's interesting, man. It's going to be fun. I think we should wrap up. You guys are going to see a lot more of us, but we're going to be having a different focus. Obviously, as we shift into the off-season stuff, you'll be back here tomorrow after the game.
I cannot believe it, but yes.
I mean, you're going to talk about you're going to know what pick the Bears have at that point.
I'm probably going to, so I've talked about this a little bit on Twitter, but I ran a poll. The results came back 80% in favor of just watch Texans Colts. And I go with the people. I'm half joking.
So that's the bear with me. Bear with me is Texans Colts tomorrow.
Not literally. But I'm probably going to try to watch both games because do any of you guys, just the 25 wonderful Bears fans that we've got in here, do any of y'all really care about a detailed breakdown about Nathan Peterman's performance, like with Dieter Iselin blocking for him, and just what a mess, right, Jeff? Like, we've been talking for Dante Pettis long enough. Do you need me to keep talking about him? John, you know what? It sounds like you do. Then in that case, for you, I will make sure that I study this game. But I'm dying to know, Jeff. I mean, one more game of relatively unfun football. Here we go.
Once more unto the breach, my friend. I believe, if we're going to end with a little Shakespeare. So I'll be back tomorrow morning to do Gambling Show. You'll be back tomorrow afternoon to do Bear With Me. Monday, Lester and I will wrap up the season with Bear and Balanced. Wednesday, I'll be back with EJ to wrap up the season. Well, actually, we're not going to talk about the game. I don't even care what happens in this game. We are going to talk about his big picture perspective on this draft before EJ goes off and does draft stuff and bootleg stuff. We'll wrap up the season there. Of course, Bill Zimmerman will be around. He'll be doing his thing. Make sure you're checking out Taylor Dahl's work as well. And then we're hitting it hard. We're going to hit the ground running, and we're going to do draft stuff, and we're going to get you guys prepped for Senior Bowl. I can't go this year, but like I said, we're going to have a big contingent down there. It's going to be awesome. And we will figure some stuff out with Shrine Bowl as well. We'll try to have as much coverage as we can on the two major
Bowls.
Bowl, what do you call them? All-Star games. And we'll go from there. And it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm excited to get to the off season. So hopefully you guys are as well. And we'll see you soon.
Can't wait. Talk to you soon.